Right. So, imagine a time long before the cities of London, Manchester or Cardiff existed. Picture a land covered in thick forests, rolling green hills and misty marshes. This was the island we now call Great Britain, and it was home to a remarkable group of people known as the Britons. They were not English, Scottish or Welsh as we know them today. Instead, they were a collection of fierce, artistic and deeply spiritual tribes who shared a common culture and language. For hundreds of years, they were the original inhabitants of this land, shaping its character long before anyone else arrived. Their story is one of resilience, struggle, and a legacy that quietly lives on all around us. The Britons were part of a much larger family of peoples called the Celts. This ancient culture had spread across a huge part of Europe, from modern-day Turkey all the way to Ireland. They were not a single unified empire like the Romans. Instead, they were a network of different tribes who shared similar beliefs, artistic styles and languages. Think of it like a family with many cousins living in different houses, but all sharing a common ancestry. The Britons were the branch of this Celtic family that settled in Great Britain. They brought with them their iron-working skills, their unique art filled with swirling patterns, and their powerful religious leaders, the Druids. So where did these people live? The Britons inhabited the entire island of Great Britain, from the windswept coasts of Cornwall in the south to the rugged highlands of Scotland in the north. They didn't build sprawling stone cities like the Romans would later on. Their homes were often circular houses called roundhouses, made from wood, wattle and daub, and topped with a cone-shaped thatched roof. These homes were clustered together in small villages or defended settlements known as hill forts. These massive earthwork forts, like Maiden Castle in Dorset, were built on high ground, giving the Britons a commanding view of the surrounding landscape and a safe place to retreat during times of conflict. Understanding the Britons is key to understanding the very foundations of British history. They were the people who gave the island its first name, Albion, and later Britain. They were the ones who first farmed its fields, mined its metals, and told stories about its magical landscapes. Their world was one of iron, earth, and spirit. Before the written word became common, they passed down their history through epic poems and songs, celebrating brave warriors and powerful gods. The story of the Britons is the first chapter in the long, complex and fascinating history of the island of Great Britain, setting the stage for everything that was to come. Life for the Britons before the Roman legions landed was defined by the tribe. The island was not one united kingdom, but a patchwork of territories, each ruled by its own king or queen. Famous tribes included the Iceni in the east, the Catuvelloni north of the River Thames, and the Brigantes in the north of England. These tribes often fought with one another over land, cattle, and honor. A tribe's strength was measured by its warriors, who were famous for their ferocity in battle. They would often paint their bodies with blue woad, a plant dye, to appear more terrifying to their enemies, and they rode into battle on fast, two-wheeled chariots, a fearsome sight for any opponent. Daily life for most Britons revolved around farming and craftsmanship. They were skilled farmers who grew crops like wheat and barley and raised cattle, sheep and pigs. They used iron tools such as plows to work the land more effectively than their Bronze Age ancestors. Beyond the fields, they were incredible artists and metalworkers. Briton craftsmen created beautiful and intricate objects from bronze, gold and iron. They made stunning jewelry like torques, heavy twisted neck rings worn by nobles, as well as decorated shields, helmets and mirrors. This Celtic art was not realistic. Instead, it was filled with flowing, abstract spirals and complex knotwork, reflecting a deep connection to the natural and spiritual worlds. Spirituality was at the very heart of Britain society, and its guardians were the Druids. The Druids were more than just priests. They were the judges, teachers, philosophers, and astronomers of their people. They held immense power and were respected by everyone, from the lowest farmer to the most powerful chieftain. They believed in many gods and goddesses connected to nature: the sun, the moon, rivers and trees. Sacred groves of oak trees and mystical bodies of water were their temples. Because they did not write down their sacred knowledge, it took up to 20 years of training to become a druid, memorizing thousands of poems, laws and histories. Society was structured in a clear hierarchy. At the top were the nobles and warriors, who owned the land and held the political power. Their wealth was displayed through their fine clothes, gold torques, and the number of warriors they could command. Below them were the craftspeople and the farmers who made up the bulk of the population. At the very bottom were slaves who were often captives taken in tribal wars. It was a world built on loyalty, honor, and a deep connection to one's tribe and ancestors. This was the vibrant, complex, and sometimes violent world that Julius Caesar first encountered when his Roman ships approached the white cliffs of the coast. The Roman eagle, the famous standard of its legions, finally landed in force in the year 43 AD under the Emperor Claudius. This was not the first Roman visit. Julius Caesar had made 2 brief expeditions almost a century earlier, but he had not stayed to conquer. Claudius, however, was determined to add the mysterious island of Britannia to his empire. He sent 4 legions, around 20,000 professional soldiers, to do the job. The Britons, used to fighting other tribes, were now faced with the most organized and disciplined fighting machine in the ancient world. The Romans built roads, forts, and supply lines with ruthless efficiency, pushing ever deeper into Briton territory. Resistance was fierce and courageous. Many Briton tribes fought back with incredible bravery. The most famous resistance leader was Boudica, queen of the Iceni tribe. After the Romans flogged her and abused her daughters, she led a massive rebellion in 60 to 61 AD. Her army of furious Britons sacked and burned 3 major Roman cities, Camulodunum, Londinium, and Verulamium. For a moment it seemed she might drive the Romans out of Britain for good. However, her tribal army was eventually cornered and defeated by a smaller but better organized Roman force. Boudica's rebellion showed the Romans that conquering Britain would be no easy task. Over time, the Romans established control over what is now England and Wales, a province they called Britannia. Life changed dramatically for the Britons who lived under their rule. The Romans built new towns with stone buildings, bathhouses, temples, and amphitheaters. They introduced their laws, their language, Latin, and their currency. Many Britons, especially the tribal elite, began to adopt Roman ways. They became Roman Britons or Romano-Britons. They learned to speak Latin, wore togas, and lived in luxurious villas with mosaic floors and central heating. This process is called Romanization, the blending of Roman and Briton cultures. However, Roman rule did not extend over the entire island. The Romans built Hadrian's Wall across the north of England to mark the edge of their empire and to keep out the unconquered tribes of the north, whom they called the Picts. For nearly 400 years, southern Britain was part of the vast, interconnected Roman Empire. Roman roads connected towns, trade flourished, and a new hybrid culture was born. But this period of relative peace and stability was not destined to last forever. As the Roman Empire began to crumble from within, its grip on its farthest province started to weaken, leaving the Romano-Britons to an uncertain fate. By the early 5th century, the Roman Empire was in serious trouble. It was facing threats from all sides and could no longer afford to keep its legions stationed in a distant province like Britannia. Around the year 410 AD, the Romans officially withdrew, telling the Romano-Britons they had to defend themselves. This left a massive power vacuum. The Romano-Britons were now vulnerable. They had grown accustomed to Roman protection and had forgotten some of their ancestors' old warrior ways. Raiders from Ireland, known as the Scoti, and from the north, the Picts, began to attack their coasts, and a new, more formidable threat was sailing across the North Sea. This new threat came from Germanic tribes, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. At first, some of these warriors may have been invited by Briton leaders to act as mercenaries, hired soldiers to help defend against the Picts. But soon they saw how rich and defenseless the land was, and they started arriving in greater numbers to settle permanently. This was not a single organized invasion, but a slow and steady migration over many decades. They fought the Britons for control of the best farmland in the fertile lowlands of the east and south. The land that was once Britannia began to transform into what would eventually be called Angleland, or England. The Britons did not give up their homeland without a fight. Legends tell of a Great Britain war leader who united the tribes and won a series of major victories against the Saxon invaders. This figure is believed to be the historical basis for the legendary King Arthur. He is said to have led the Britons to a great victory at the Battle of Mount Badon around the year 500 AD, which halted the Anglo-Saxon advance for a generation. While archaeologists have not found Camelot, the stories of Arthur reflect a real period of determined Briton resistance, a last heroic stand to save their culture and their land. Despite the temporary success of leaders like the one who inspired Arthur, the tide of history was against the Britons. The Anglo-Saxons controlled the wealthier, more agricultural eastern parts of the island, and their numbers continued to grow. Over the next 2 centuries, the Britons were slowly but surely pushed westwards and northwards. They retreated into the mountainous, rugged parts of the island, where the Anglo-Saxons found it harder to follow. These pockets of Briton survival became the foundations of the modern nations of Wales and Cornwall, as well as the Briton kingdom of Strathclyde in what is now southern Scotland. Their language and culture, though pushed to the fringes, managed to endure. Although the Anglo-Saxons came to dominate much of the island, the legacy of the Britons was never completely erased. It survives today in the very fabric of the United Kingdom, often in places we might not expect. One of the most visible reminders is in the languages that are still spoken. The Welsh language, or Cymraeg, is a direct descendant of the Brythonic language spoken by the ancient Britons. When you hear someone speaking Welsh, you're hearing an echo of the tongue of Boudica and the warriors who resisted the Romans. Similarly, the Cornish and Breton languages, those spoken by fewer people, also trace their roots directly back to this ancient Celtic heritage. The Britons also left their mark on the map of Great Britain. While many English place names are Anglo-Saxon, like Birmingham or Nottingham, many others have Celtic Briton origins, especially for natural features. The names of many rivers, like the Thames, Avon and Trent, come from Briton words. Place names that begin with Pen, meaning hill or head, like Penzance, or Dun, meaning fort, like Dumbarton, are Celtic. Even the names of some cities, like London and Leeds, likely have their origins in the pre-Roman Briton language. These names are like linguistic fossils, preserving the memory of the people who first named the landscape. The most famous legacy of the Britons is undoubtedly their mythology, especially the legends of King Arthur. The stories of Arthur, Merlin, Camelot, and the Knights of the Round Table are some of the most famous in the world. These tales began as Welsh and Cornish folk stories, celebrating a heroic leader who fought for the Britons. Over the centuries, they were written down and embellished by French and English writers, but their heart remains firmly Briton. They represent a powerful story of heroic resistance against overwhelming odds and the dream of a lost golden age. This mythology has inspired countless books, poems and films, keeping the spirit of the Britons alive in our collective imagination. In the end, the story of the Britons is a powerful reminder that history is layered. The Britain we know today was not built on an empty land, it was built on top of the world of the Britons. Their DNA flows in the veins of many modern British people, their words linger on the map, and their legends continue to enchant us. They were the original people of this island, a culture of fierce warriors, brilliant artists and spiritual thinkers. By understanding who they were, how they lived, and what they endured, we gain a much deeper and richer appreciation for the long and complex story of Britain and its people. The Britons may have been pushed to the margins, but they were never truly gone.